I'm Doug Grant, one of the partners at Insurance-Canada.ca. It's our pleasure to be hosting this webinar today as we look at exploring and innovating with data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, brought to you by IBM. Our speaker today is Rob Fursey, a senior consultant with the IBM Canada Watson AI practice. His guest is Hashmat Rohian, a senior director and architect with the Cooperators group. Hashmat spoke at our technology conference about a lead generation mobile app called Home to Be they had developed in conjunction with Cumis. Today, following Rob's presentation and his discussion with Hashmat, Christine Haberlin, Business Development Executive for Insurance at IBM Canada, will direct questions you have submitted to Rob and Hashmat. This webinar is the inaugural event in a series of webinars and seminars under the umbrella Technology in Action that we are offering. Thank you for your interest and for attending today. Before we begin, a few administrative details. As you are listening, should you have any questions you would like to address to our speakers, please enter them into the questions box on the control panel. As noted, following the presentation, our moderator, Christine Haberlin, will present questions you have asked to Hashmat and Rob. We are recording the webinar. We will send a note out to you within the next day or two with a link to it should you wish to review it or pass it along to others. When you exit the webinar today, there is a short survey. We would appreciate your answers. And equally, we would appreciate any additional comments in an email about the topic or other topics you might be interested in hearing about. On that note, let me now introduce Rob. Rob, over to you.
Thank you, Doug. So thanks everyone for joining. Like Doug said, my name is Rob Fursey. I am a senior consultant with IBM Canada, specializing in artificial intelligence and specifically AI deployment and strategy for AI solutions. Let me just get the navigator open here. So I just wanted to quickly walk through a few slides here around exploring and innovating with AI, machine learning, and other data science applications. And then, as Doug mentioned, we'll get into a brief Q&A with Hashmat Rohian, who is from the Cooperators, and we'll speak about some of the work we've done with them over the past year. So I'm going to start with a quick dive into the industry a little bit, and how how we see trends like this evolving in insurance, and not just in insurance, but as far as trends in general evolving towards customer expectations. Now, the buying power for the millennial group, so this is the fastest growing customer group in the world at the moment, is getting exponentially larger. And now with that growth in buying power and in overall size comes the demand that's associated with it as it relates to everything else that they're comfortable and familiar with. And this includes 24/7 access to their insurance companies and other companies as well as access to all of their information in the palm of their hands, right? And through simple digital interfaces, customized policies, easier claims filling and redemptions. All of these are things that are becoming of more importance to that customer segment. And because of this growing demand and growing necessity, so does grow the requirement for solutions that facilitate this demand. And this includes artificial intelligence solutions, in things like virtual assistants and chatbots, robotic process automation, other cloud platforms that provide things like this, really providing users with the experience that they are expecting out of their organizations. And obviously, this rapid growth in artificial intelligence solutions is just the start of this innovation, and that innovation continues to grow. Every year we see new technologies, and keeping up can be difficult. But as I've mentioned, it is becoming almost the expectation to keep up with this this pace of innovation. And so we wanted to kind of spend the next bit of time talking about kind of what are, what is machine learning, artificial intelligence, and then we'll get into a few examples of where these types of solutions are being used and some examples of how you could use them yourselves. So we'll go into the kind of the what, right? And this includes kind of a look at, obviously, robotics is changing the world, right? And not just in a physical sense, but in a non-physical sense as well, right? Things like chatbots and other machine learning applications are becoming the standard in which people want to communicate. But on the other side of this, you see a lot of hesitancy for people to use them, particularly the older generations. But obviously, those customer segments are still of incredible importance. So we see, if we look at a couple of statistics, you think of this unstoppable revolution that's happening as far as AI is concerned, and it's very hard to counterbalance that. And there's a lot of people, a lot of feeling out there that there's obviously there's this 35% of jobs are at risk of being automated over the next 2 years is a very scary thing to think about. But part of the other side to that is you have to think about this in the context of augmented intelligence as well, right? And the fact that artificial intelligence doesn't just mean doing everything for you, but it means much more than that, right? It is providing you with information that you may not have otherwise had to produce better work products, or to provide information to your customers faster, or to analyze documents that are so complex in nature that it takes such heavy manual labor to do that, that you want to find better uses of those particular people's time, right? And so don't necessarily think of it in the context of 30% of jobs are being automated, but think of it in the context of people's jobs are going to be enhanced by the availability of this technology. And so that kind of brings me to my counterpoint of the previous slide, which is that not all robots are evil. Not all robots are there to take over the world or take over an organization, but they're there to help. They're there to provide an alternative, fuel into the organism or the organization that needs it, that needs that fuel to do what they need to do. So bring me to an example of what human cognition, or how a human decision life cycle kind of looks today, right? You look at this example. This is in the context of a doctor, but you can think of it in the context of really anyone. There's 5 core steps to how humans make decisions or plan something. And it really starts with, retrieving the information that you need. So in the context of the doctor, this includes things like x-rays, blood tests, monitoring a patient. And based on this information, people make predictions based on that, right? They'll say, if we do A, we get B. If we do C, we get D, right? And making those predictions and then making a recommendation or judgment based on those predictions, that's kind of the first 3 major steps to following a particular path. And then, taking that action for that particular individual is that, kind of the icing on the cake, and then assessing the outcomes kind of says, okay, well, how did it all work? Did it all function as we wanted it to? And those assessments of outcomes fuel the next decision that you have to go through, right? So this is kind of how that life cycle functions today. Now, if you think about it in the context of how AI or machine learning can help with this, you really think of those first 3 segments of that process, and the fact that these are very, easily automated functions, right? Things like retrieving information for a particular individual, that's very, very important, right? Getting a policy information for a person immediately, as opposed to having to pull up a policy and searching through policy documents to find the correct information for an individual. That's a very valuable thing to get that immediately, or in a very, in the snap of a finger. and making predictions based on that information. So if you have to say, based on the information I found, here are the top 3 or top 5 or top 10 options I think that we should follow, and then maybe even providing a top recommendation of those 5 or 10 options to say, here's all the information that I was able to find for you. And then it's really, still leave it up to the human to do the real value add actions or capabilities as a part of this process. So actually making that judgment call absolutely still relies on the human decision, right? And taking that action, assessing outcomes. All of the these final 3 steps are really part of what the human brings to the table, whereas the first 3 are really part of what an AI solution or machine learning solution can bring to the table in that process, right? And this is kind of how we want, how we see this evolving, or and this could evolve even further beyond this, but at least for now, this is kind of where it stands. Now, if we look at kind of a quick comparison of what cognitive computing is in the context of artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, this is kind of a quick chart that I wanted to throw up to show how they are all related together, right? And cognitive computing is a very, I guess, marketing heavy word, specific to, that kind of encompasses a lot of the artificial intelligence, deep learning, machine learning, and other data science applications as well. It's kind of the highest level of descriptor, right? And that's really systems that simulate a human sense to learn at scale, reason, and interact, right? Those are the 3 core pieces: is understanding, reasoning, and learning, right? And so, if you think about that in a I guess at one level down, artificial intelligence is kind of the broadest term used. And this is really to say that, our AI is really a technology that enables computers to mimic a specific human intelligence or a specific human function. Oftentimes it's leveraging machine learning to make a determination, and then based on that determination, it might follow a set path, right? Using logic or if-then rules based on the initial kind of. And so, machine learning is really the more, usually it's statistical techniques or statistical models or algorithms that allow a machine to effectively learn at a particular task. So this isn't saying that there's one algorithm that says a machine can learn just about anything, but it says in specific cases like natural language classification, for example, which is learning how people talk, right? Or the context of a language translation, learning all the nuances of how a specific language is talked or spoken, and actually determining, using a model or an algorithm to decide what is the best translation there, or what is the best understanding of this piece of text. And then the kind of the final deepest part of this is deep learning, right? And this is where you see these are kind of algorithms that actually allow software to learn on its own. So specifically, this would be things like if you wanted a bot that learned from the people that it talked to, right? It wouldn't learn from a background data set that someone is training it on, but it would learn from its actual users, right? That kind of thing. That's more the context of deep learning. And for the most part, a lot of solutions don't leverage deep learning yet, but obviously that's becoming more and more of an important consideration, because the ability to automatically learn something obviously is of importance moving forward. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk through around machine learning and AI and what they kind of are. Now we kind of want to get into the where. So these are specific examples of where we see machine learning, AI applications being applied in organizations, or not necessarily in organizations themselves, but ways that you could apply this type of technology. And I want to think of it in the context of where insurance is today. And so if you think about the idea of digitizing paper data, so obviously, you know, there's a lot of processes that still rely on paper information via paper data, quote unquote paper data. That's very hard to analyze and requires a lot of manual effort to digitize, right? And so it's often infeasible to digitize a lot of this data because it's very, very difficult to pick up on all the nuances and all the contextual pieces of information there. But I wanted to kind of give an example of something we call smart pages, and this is a kind of a technology that's been built in IBM that leverages OCR, or optical character recognition technology, to kind of classify and normalize information in a paper document. So instead of just looking at you know, what's on the page and using keywords to define, okay, if this then that, it's more like finding a group, you know, it tries to actually transform handwriting into digital text, which I would say is getting incredibly accurate today. You know, it's evolved a lot, and there's been a lot of great strides in the form of actually transforming accurately handwriting into text, into digital text. And then it takes a lot of this now digitized text and classifies it in groups and classifies it with other you know, pieces of information in mind to actually try and understand the context of that piece of information, not just what the information is and then trying to you know, bucket it into sections, but how that piece of information is on the page is another, I think a fairly important point to this. And so, you know, other things like signature and checkbox detection, obviously a lot of these things are out there, but actually automating this is kind of the key, right? And I think one other pretty cool thing about this is, you know, having things like image recognition and analysis as well on that particular paper data to kind of relate things back even further to different contexts as well. And so one example I kind of put at the bottom of the page here was, you know, a car accident example. So you get into a car accident and the police show up and they fill out this long police report for that particular accident. And now, you know, obviously in order to submit a claim against that, oftentimes you need to provide a police report if that was, you know, if that was involved. And that would take a lot of manual effort to validate the information in that police report. But one of the examples we kind of see using something like a Smart Pages application is taking a police report that is, you know, filled out all with your, you know, handwriting at the scene and actually transforming that into usable data automatically, right? And you know, bringing in things like contextual pieces of information as it relates to that accident, and sending that along to almost a, you know, a background data store or following along in the proper process that would need to be processed in. But instead of it needing to be manually reviewed, it can now be, you know, at least reviewed preliminarily and then validated by a person at the end of the day, right? You still probably want someone to say, yes, that's correct, yes, that's correct. But it doesn't require the level of depth and diligence that analyzing an entire document would require. So that's kind of the example of digitizing paper data, I think is a strong one. If we go on into another example, as far as, you know, telematics is concerned, this is obviously another big pattern that's evolving, especially in the insurance area, and especially with the advent of, you know, with the importance or the growing importance of Internet of Things, and how that technology is shaping, you know, the world. But you know, one example is Desjardins Insurance is launching a new feature for its customers that allows their customers to be alerted in the event of an extreme weather condition that might impact them. So you know, I think it launched pretty recently, but essentially what the idea is leveraging you know, weather data, is being able to allow a customer, for example, to select 5 different locations, and for them to be notified in the event that there's a severe weather event within 500 meters of that location, And this has lots of different implications, but I think the number one implication is it allows for people to be less reactive and more proactive in how they're handling some situations. So from a customer perspective, I can be assured that, you know, I can get out there and respond to the issue, or maybe you know, if I need to cover a boat or something like that, where you can start to try and prevent the damage before it actually happens. And then from a Desjardins perspective, they can, as soon as they know that a number of their customers could be impacted by a severe weather event, they can start to mobilize people to also try and maybe not prevent the impending you know, severe weather, but at least be prepared to respond to it, you know, in a very efficient manner. And I think it's a very, very important thing to think about, because this is really from a customer security perspective, or a customer safety perspective. This is, I think, a very interesting application of things like data science and weather data. So, you know, that kind of covers a little bit of the you know, collecting data and using some data real time. And I kind of wanted to show another example of from USAA. And this is an example where USAA is actually using, you know, Watson for customer insight, where they built a, you know, kind of a model that leverages, you know, cognitive and behavioral data to actually understand their customers a little bit better, right? So not just in the context of reacting to weather trends, or in the context of you know, analyzing old documents, but this is, you know, actually understanding their customers to the point where they can start to improve their you know, how they treat their customers and how they retain their customers is, I think, a very important aspect there. So, you know, generating insights based on, you know, life event prediction, I think is, you know, if they could analyze a whole bunch of social media data to understand, oh yeah, you know, maybe this person has a wedding coming up in 8 weeks, and instead of them getting married and then having to worry about all the stress of you know, changing everything over to that life event, maybe, you know, it's USAA can start to preemptively notify their users or their members to say, hey, you know, you have a wedding coming up. Please don't forget to, you know, create this life event on the day, so that, you know, when all is said and done, you don't have to stress about this later, right? And really, how to enhance the customer experience using, you know, real customer data, I think is a very interesting perspective, and really shows where this is all going, right? Where is technology like this taking customer experience, right? And that kind of brings us to our next page, is really around I think one of the most important aspects, apart from just the digitization of paper and collecting weather data and collecting other data on your customers, but think about how that data influences a customer experience, and using technology like virtual agents or chatbots to really ensure or enable you know, insurers to actually treat their customers the way that they deserve to be treated, right? I mentioned at in a previous slide that, you know, there's a huge growing customer segment with millennials. Well, a lot of them are used to very quick and easy experiences, not necessarily in the insurance world or in the banking world or in other worlds, but in you know, they start to compare their last best experience with every experience they have moving forward. And I really love this quote that I have up there, which is, you know, the last best experience that anyone has anywhere becomes the minimum expectation for the experience they want everywhere, right? And thinking about it from the context of a millennial is I think a very important thing, because they're the ones that will be using this, you know, that will be your core customer base in, you know, 15, 20 years time. And starting to warp the experiences that you deliver around that customer base is becoming a far more important expectation of the market. And so really making a difference with customer experience through things like chatbots and virtual agents, and like I mentioned before, USAA really understanding their customers a little better is becoming really important. And we look at a couple of examples with regards to this. There's RoboChat is deployed by Bayou Bank in Australia, where essentially what it is it's a bot that helps individuals as they're filling out a mortgage application. If they have questions that they don't, if they don't understand certain things about that mortgage application, they can pull up Watson on the side and say, hey, what is this? Or I need help with this, right? And actually not necessarily overly changing their application process, but changing the experience they go through while filling out that application, I think is, it's very valuable. And having the ability to handle questions like that in a manner that people want to be asking them, which is not necessarily requiring them to pick up a phone and wait on hold for 5 minutes, but I just have a quick, easy question I want to get answered right now while I'm filling out this application. Right, and you think about how that could equate to a better, turnover or I guess ratio of confirmed home loans in this case, where instead of someone getting frustrated calling a helpline and then never revisiting that application again, they could, you have a higher ratio of people that get from start to finish on an application without ever leaving that application, and potentially, you increase your customer base through increased experience, right? Or improved experience. And another great example, and I think this is an important one, is how H&R Block are leveraging Watson and cognitive solutions to give their employees information at their fingertips so they can help their customers with their tax returns. So providing H&R Block with information like, 720 million tax returns over the past 60 years, as well as other personal financial documents, and tax filers and all this different tax policy right at their fingertips, so that while they're talking to their customers, they can be much more informed than they were before about how to service that particular person, and potentially even bring more individualization to how they handle that customer's situation. And I just think this is kind of the alternative to a customer-facing solution. This is a really good example of how you can enable your employees to be more effective or more customer service oriented through cognitive solutions like this. And kind of one of the final examples that I have as far as this is concerned is Prudential. And Prudential Singapore launched Ask Pru, I think, back in July, and it was built using IBM Watson. But it essentially, this is another example of helping their employees service their customers, and it allows their financial consultants who are always on the go, always mobile, giving them a mobile app on their phone or on their iPad to get real-time access to details about their customer's life insurance plan, not necessarily just through a mobile app, but via communicating with the chatbot, and it isn't just limited to information about their customer's life insurance plan, but giving information like frequently asked questions that maybe they don't know the answer to right off the top of their head. It allows them to service their customers all the time, even off hours, right? Most people are probably only available after 5 or 6 when the workday ends. So giving the ability to have a service that can help your financial consultants on a 24/7 basis, I think is of really huge impact. And so they launched this in July to about 4,000 of their financial consultants. And there's no data yet around what the actual outcome was, but they were expecting that the improved efficiencies through using this tool could reduce their call center volume by around 30%. And that, I think, speaks a lot to how, in general, how things like AI and machine learning can really help, and not just from an experiential perspective, but also from a cost perspective. You can now reduce, or at least maybe even reorganize that call center to allow for a lot of people to handle more complex situations, right? And that's kind of the number one thing, is how do you allow for a call center agent to, instead of always handling the what is this, what is that, what is this, what is that, maybe you can answer more complicated questions like I'm having an issue with X or I'm having an issue with Y, and actually helping that user get through that, as opposed to bogging down a call center with a lot of these easily answerable questions. And so this kind of all relates back to the, I guess, the overall view of how you should think about things like AI and machine learning and data science. It's really all about these three kind of things. Is you want to capitalize on this huge explosion of data, right? And this is seen through things like that weather application that I mentioned. Things like leveraging a lot of the paper data that you have that isn't digitized yet, that might have hidden insights in them, and really capitalizing on all of that data that exists, and taking this data and realigning a lot of the purpose of what product should be and what an experience should be, which is all around delighting your customers, right? And beyond this, taking that new purpose and creating a future experience, or really reinventing how your customers view your organization through unique and different experiences. So that was kind of what I wanted to focus on with examples of this in the marketplace. The final thing I'm going to touch on before we kind of talk to Hashmat is the how, right? And I think this is a big question mark in a lot of people's brains, is how do I get started? How am I successful? How do I actually make this happen? And so the way that at least we believe that the most appropriate approach is planning for success through iteration, right? It's not necessarily planning this huge, long, drawn-out project that gets you tons of different functionality and servicing tens of thousands of clients right off the start. But you start with, kind of getting yourself engaged in the cognitive discussion, right? You start to think about, okay, well, what is cognitive? Let's enlighten our organization about what cognitive is and what it can do for our organization, and really start to identify some areas in which there can be some enhancements using AI and machine learning. And that's when you kind of pivot yourself from just introducing yourself to the technology and into a proof of concept or getting ready for a pilot, right? Testing out a small subset, or a small, we'll call it a quick win scenario, to really prove to the organization or prove to your clients that this is technology that can really help them. Right? And in addition, some benefits of this includes other things like improving the understanding of the technology, really understanding the limitations of some of the technology, or not necessarily limitations, but where it should be used and where it shouldn't, right? There are some examples where maybe you don't want to, put a bot right in front of your customers right away, because you want to prove that it functions well internally first, right? Those are some things that you start to learn along the way, is how do people interact with the tool, right? And really starting to understand that, and moving into kind of a production pilot, which could include things like integrating into data services, integrating into other services as well, and other AI applications, right? If you so choose. And then once you've kind of gone through this, we'll call it the exploratory phase, where you've started to really map out how your organization could leverage this technology, you prepare how rollout could look, and you really build this foundational understanding. And then once you've built that foundational understanding, that foundational awareness, you can start to actually rapidly expand into your other use cases, right? It's almost like, you want to be very comfortable with something before you just throw yourself into it. And because a lot of these solutions are tailored to your content, to your information, to your data, you want to really make sure that you figured out the best way to make those two work together, right? And there's not one guaranteed solution to make it work, but this is at least the right approach. And we've seen many organizations follow this approach with great success. And they continue to see success through approaching it this way. And so, I wanted to show a couple more slides with examples of, if you wanted to, for example, with in terms of exploring, right, and in terms of really getting yourself up and running, it's not a huge time effort, I'll say, to get yourself going. Where the effort is in really analyzing the information that you have, and really building out a number of use cases to understand, okay, this is the best application for this across our organization, and prioritizing those use cases as per where, once you've proved out kind of the first exploratory engagements, to say, okay, now we think we need to go forward on this current one, but we also need to expand to this one, and we need to test it with 1,500 real users. And I think that's one of the important things that's mentioned in this slide is, as you roll this out, you want to get not just you don't just want technology people involved here. These are solutions that are often built, where you need to incorporate business knowledge as well, right? And so getting that business knowledge and replicating that requires, a lot of high touch as you roll things out to really make sure that it's meeting their expectation, right? And testing it for the way that they ask questions or for the way that they need to see output, is a very critical piece to training an AI solution in that way. And then, beyond that, the ongoing enhancements, and I think an important word here is co-delivery, right? Really understanding how to deliver this in a powerful way is important. Okay, and then kind of the final page here is, before we get to Hashmat, is really about, builds on that a little bit, is the best ways to get started, and then measuring your outcomes at the end, right? Is to really start with potentially even a design thinking session or agile approaches to how to develop meaningful use cases, identify specific business outcomes, and really, I think the number one thing is, and this kind of relates back to all of the use cases we've said today, it's, at the end of the day, it's all about, it's about experience, right? And I think taking what you want to do and relating that to how you can improve an experience, or how you can enhance the way that your customers communicate, or the way that they want to be communicated with. I think it's important to always put it in that perspective, right? It's the perspective of the user outcome. Okay. And so, and another thing is, beyond that, it's important to prove it, and prove it fast. And then once you've proved it fast, and once you're comfortable with how that's looking and working, you really start to plan out a roadmap and set milestones. And then once you've gotten into this iterative build process, you can start to, measure these outcomes through not just through scorecards, traditional scorecards to monitor the program, but I think the most important thing is really listening to the users that are using it, right, and how they can change the way that your solution works, because at the end of the day, they are the representatives of the people that would actually use it at the end of the day. Okay. So that was kind of what I wanted to talk through around, kind of the industry, the what, the where, and the how. And now I wanted to invite, Hashmat, Rohian, and to kind of talk a little bit about, I have a few questions here that, we'll kind of talk back and forth a little bit, but I wanted to kind of ask him a few questions about some of the experiences that he's been going through lately with AI and machine learning. And then once we're through with that, we'll take some questions from the phones. Okay, so Hashmat, I think you're there. Great.
I'm here, Rob.
Yeah, great. So I guess if I could start off with a quick question around briefly describing the business problem that you are trying to solve with the solution that we've been working with you on for the past, I guess, 8 months or so. with the Cooperators that we call the Advisor Assist.
Thank you, Rob. The problem that we were trying to solve was we wanted to augment our advisors with digital knowledge base and digital tools and experiences that they can use so that to minimize or to reduce the number of calls we were getting at call center. In a typical year, we would get over 50,000 calls from our advisor workforce to our call centers asking short-tailed questions that were, how do I find this? What do I do next? What happens now? These kind of questions that were not complex questions in nature, but we wanted to get some of those questions answered through digital interfaces like a chatbot, an intelligent knowledge base backed by an intelligent knowledge base that can offload some of those calls from our call center so that the call center folks can focus on the real value add complex questions. So that was the problem statement that we were trying to address, was how do we augment, how do we assess our advisor workforce with these kind of tools that are fueled and supported and enabled by AI.
Great, thanks. And yeah, that kind of aligns with a couple of other examples we saw tonight, or this afternoon. Now, what were some of the most interesting insights that you found throughout the course of the pilot that we ran?
I think the big thing is around how we got it started. The way we got started on the AI was not with we have AI, now let's do something with it. We actually started, we went through a design thinking process where we wanted to identify the right problem to solve. We wanted to define the challenge and explore the human context. So we brought in a bunch of our advisors, had conversation with our call center folks. Then we went through an ideate process where we kind of brainstormed about ideas that are good and bad. And then we proceeded to a prototype where we worked with IBM to start creating, experimenting, and failing fast, but learning faster. We had a good business value case in mind as well, which kind of helped us to start on the right foot. We had some good idea of what do we want to minimize, whether it's improving our call deflection, whether it's first call resolution, or reducing the number of calls that can be addressed, and also the teachable moments for our advisor workforce. And then finally, we actually went and implemented it. So that process of design thinking actually really helped make sure we focus on the right problem and not start with a solution at hand and say, well, let's figure out where we can put AI. So we started with a problem, a true business problem. We had several candidates, and we picked on this one because this had the most immediate value or benefit that we could realize. And the other thing I would also add is the human element is absolutely important. The change that this could cause in work processes, business processes, and how advisors and how call centers interact with each other and with systems. We have to take that into account. We have to make sure that they are engaged from the get-go, that we have some level of understanding of what is AI. AI is a bit of a loaded term. Artificial intelligence. So we had to unpack that into assisted intelligence, augmented intelligence, and autonomous intelligence. And what we, as you can probably imagine, assisted intelligence is something that's more focused on assisting humans in doing what they need to do. Augmenting is actually augmenting them so that they can focus more on the things that are more important to them. And of course, autonomous. And as you go through this spectrum, the amount of machine learning and the complexity of the data and the analytic models increase. So explaining what we are trying to do, we don't want to go autonomous. We're not trying to, replace people. We're trying to augment them so that they can focus on the things that actually bring the most value to our clients. and they can find their work more meaningful and productive. So that was another key insight. Starting with the human context was another thing, and of course having a very agile approach where we had some good. We did a prototype in about 6 to 8 weeks. We gave it for another 8 weeks to our advisor, a bunch of advisor pilot who we piloted with. We had some good validation metrics that we took them through. And, at the end of it, then we said, okay, is this a successful? Can we meet the value case we had initially envisioned or not? And then from then on, we are moving on to the next phase of the project.
Great, thank you. And what would you say are the top 3 challenges that, insurance companies like Cooperators face when looking at leveraging AI and other machine learning based applications, and how have you approached some of those challenges?
I think earlier, as I said, not focusing on the technology or the buzzword, whether it is artificial intelligence, machine learning, cognitive, but actually focusing on the business problem and educating and making folks within business aware of the art of the possible, and also introducing them to how other banks, other financial institutions are leveraging these capabilities was definitely something that helped us. The other thing is actually doing a very agile process and not doing a big bang project on this. Actually being very incremental, being very iterative, doing value cases, doing proof of concepts, and checking with the business stakeholders, making sure that they are on board and they are on side and they are seeing the value of it, and then rolling it out and expanding the knowledge base, as well as improving the customer experience or the client experience on these different interfaces.
Okay, and that kind of leads well into my next question, which is kind of what is the best way to get buy-in from executive stakeholders?
I think relating it back to the business problem. We have at Cooperators, we have 3 strategic imperatives, and number 1 on that is client engagement, and number 2 is competitiveness. So how do we solve a problem that aligns with these strategic imperatives? Understanding the pain points of the business, educating, inspiring, and communicating what others within the industry or other verticals or how they are using these. That's part of it. So that definitely it's a bit of a awareness, and as well as explaining that we're not asking for a big bang technology investment. We want to find a solution to a business problem. So that whole concept of design thinking to begin with, followed by agile and more of the lean startup principles, actually definitely helps. And keeping a very data-driven approach where we are tracking every interactions, where we're tracking different metrics to make sure that the value case that we have envisioned, to solve the business problem is being realized or not.
Right. And is there any final advice that you might have for an insurance organization that is looking to begin their journey into AI, machine learning, and any other data science-based application?
I'll just repeat what I said earlier. I would say start with the business problem, start with the people, and start with understanding the human context of a business problem. Take them through a design thinking workshop, figure out what are the different options to solve a business problem, and then identify all the different technological capabilities, whether it is assisted intelligence, augmented intelligence, or autonomous, or a machine learning project that will then enable it. So starting with the business problem is absolutely key, both in getting buy-in and making sure that it's not a science project, but it's actually a business problem. It's a solution to a business problem. Will definitely help folks get started on the right foot with these kind of emerging technologies.
Great. Yeah, and I would say, to add to that a little bit, based on some of our experience with the Cooperators, I think having, a bunch of, almost like representatives or something that really feel strongly about the value that the technology brings, like yourself and like others within the organization, are are very important to kind of fuel this this technology, right, and the delivery of it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think, you know, if thank you so much, Hashmat. I appreciate the time that you you spent to join with us today. I will, pass it off to Christine to see if we have any questions from the phone that people want to have answered, before we close off today. Christine?
Thanks, Rob, and thanks, Hashmat. We don't have any questions that are coming through yet, so I will ask a question just in case. We would, happy to entertain any questions. Make sure that the audience on the line today, learning if there's any unanswered questions, we're happy to entertain them. I guess one question that I would ask both you, Rob, and Hashmat, is I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago and discovered that design thinking is not something that everybody is familiar with. So I wonder if you could just give a brief description, Rob, of what it is, and Hashmat, maybe just talk about, how that approach really made a difference for the projects that you've been doing.
Sure. So, so effectively, I guess in a very brief description, design thinking is really meant to really get a number of people with different perspectives into a room and focus on user outcomes. So not necessarily starting with a problem and then finding a solution to that problem, but focusing on a person, right? Taking say a user example and saying, okay, this is Joe. Joe is a customer of ours. He's 55, X, Y, Z, and really trying to understand how, you can drive value in different solutions by focusing on the user first and then building solutions around that user, given the opportunities you have to enhance that particular user's, day-to-day activities or day-to-day lifestyle. I don't want to get too deep into it because obviously I'm not a design thinking expert, but that's kind of, I guess, Cole's notes what it's all about. And Hashmat, feel free to add anything more to that, but I'll pass it off to you to answer the second half.
I think that was a pretty good description. It's a human-centered approach to solving problems. The outcome of a design thinking workshop is basically a very good understanding of the problem, or understanding the right problem. One of the biggest challenges in most of the technology projects are we're solving the wrong problem. So how do we make sure that we are solving the right problem and we invest enough time in the problem domain instead of rushing into the solution space, trying to fit a solution, starting with a solution and saying, where do I fit it within the business? So the design thinking kind of avoids that trap of starting with a solution. The other thing is it's a very good way of collaborating across different stakeholder groups. The first step in a design thinking process is to empathize. So understanding the human context, understanding the current state, understanding what people think, what people feel, what people do, and what people say about the current state, and capturing that, and then articulating what is the art of the possible, what's the future state. Definitely is a great way to do that. And then, as I mentioned, it's a very collaborative. So you have a representative across multiple groups. So all affected primary stakeholders as well as secondary stakeholders can participate in it. And it's typically a design thinking coach facilitated workshop that the outcome of which is basically a very simple problem statement that everyone believes in is the right problem that we want to address. It doesn't go into the solution space much at all. It says this is the right problem. Then we go into, okay, now what are some options around how do we go about solving? So as Einstein, if I can quote him correctly, said if I had 50 or a minute to save the world, I would spend 55 seconds thinking about the problem and 5 seconds solving the problem. So the design thinking makes sure that we invest the right amount of time understanding whether we are solving the right problem or not.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hashmat and Rob. So we just had one question, just wanting to make sure that people know that we will be making Insurance Canada and Doug Grant will be making the webinar available. And if there are no other questions, I will turn it back to Doug.
Super. Thanks very much, Christine, and to the others as well for today. For you who are listening out there, thank you for attending. I really wish to thank Rob for the information that he's given us and the insights that Hashmat has provided, obviously on behalf of the Cooperators Group. And thank you, Christine, for stepping in and coming up with a question. I had thought that there would be a lot more from the audience. We hope that you and the audience found it not only useful but helpful today, either in reinforcing your current plans or giving you some new thoughts as you move forward. Should you have questions about the content from today's event, please reach out to Christine. Her contact information is on the website about this, and I will also put it in an email that I will be sending out to you in the next day or so. Please do give us some feedbacks. As you leave the webinar, you get a pop-up survey, so appreciate your feedback there. The note that I will be sending out that I alluded to will give you a link to the recording, and Rob has agreed to provide his slide deck, so those two things will be available. Each of those, or both of them, will be available as a result of, and the instructions will be there in the note how to do that. We do have coming up at the end of May a seminar called the AI, the Foundation of Next Gen Insurance. It'll be a half day in downtown Toronto, a seminar. And we're also hoping to bring more webinars. We have one currently in process. We're just down to what is the date for it. So we're not sure whether it'll be before our seminar in May or whether it'll be subsequent to it sometime in June. In the meantime, thanks everyone again for attending, and thanks to our speakers and participants for the information that you provided to you out in the audience. That then ends the event for today. So I wish everybody a good spring. I hope it will arrive one of these days. Bye for now.